After doing some homework and watching a video on Rectify, which was about a guy whose name was Daniel getting released from prison, being exonerated by DNA evidence. Um, it was about witnesses who identified him, which later proved to be false. Uh, After watching the first episode, I decided to do my midterm project on eyewitness identification. I felt that this topic was real interesting to me. After doing some research, I felt that I know more now about eyewitness identification, as far as memory, lighting, what you think you saw. Yes, in relation to eyewitness identification. This paper talks about how the memory fades quickly. It discusses and talks about how a young woman was going to a car late at night. She was approached by a male with a hoodie on. There wasn't any lighting around. He took her purse and ran. She was able to see his face, but at the same time, she her fear was up. Her emotions were really high. She didn't really get a good picture of his face, being that he had a hoodie on and it was less light in the area. But she was able to call the cops. She waited on the cops to come. When they got there, she was able to go to an interview. She was able to identify the suspect. Um, while identifying the suspect, all of these factors came into play. The length and the time that the officers took to get there, with her emotions and fear being high, she was able to not think straight, and her memory was failing her because what she thought she saw turned out not to be the case. What I try to do is place myself in that situation. Would I be able to identify the suspect under those circumstances correctly and possibly press criminal charges on them? You have to be able to recognize and understand how much pressure is on these victims to correctly identify a suspect. This paper also talks about police photo lineups and physical lineups. There was a case where a young lady, she was going to sleep early at her home. Um, she went to bed and a criminal knocked out her back porch light, cut her phone lines, broke in her house, and wound up in her bedroom. She heard the noise. She woke up and she seen the head next to her bed. So of course, they exchanged words. She offered credit cards, money, car. He said he wasn't there for that, so he raped her. While he was raping her, she stated that she studied how he looked, what he had on, while he was raping her. As time passed, she talked him into going in the kitchen and to fix him something to drink, which he agreed. So as she left the bedroom, she ran out the house. He ran behind her, uh, going to another house to rape someone else. She called the cops. She went down to the police station. She reported it. Um, the police were able. She gave the description of the offender, of the suspect, and they took some photos. They showed her some photos and how her emotions were high. And she pointed out one of the suspects, and his name was Richard Cotton. Um, I'm sorry, his name was Ronald Cotton, not Richard Cotton. But his family seen it on the news that he was wanted for rape, and he went down to the police station and turned himself in and talked to police, which they didn't want to listen. They kept him in jail. He went to jail for rape and burglary since he was identified by the victim. Years passed, well, not years passed, but times passed, and there's another guy come to the same jail that he was in, which he favored Mr. Cotton. So Mr. Cotton approached him and said, "Hey, you look familiar. Familiar. Are you from the same town that I'm from? And he was like, yes. He said, did you rape this woman? And he said, no. So Mr. Cotton called his lawyer and asked for a new trial. He was finally given a new trial. And the new guy that he resembled was in court. The female that he had said to be raped was in court, and she identified Mr. Cotton again on the second trial as being the rapist. He went back to jail. He was in jail for 11 years before he wanted to bring it to trial again and offer a DNA evidence. Um, when the DNA results came back, he was exonerated and got out of jail. The DNA matched the guy that actually came to prison, which he talked to, saying, you look familiar. The female that was raped, she wanted to meet with the guy that she had put in jail for 11 years and to apologize, and he forgave her. Now, that's the importance of eyewitness identification. What happened was police went into, they went, got their photos, uh, they showed her the photos, and since her emotions and her fear, she had just been raped, was so high, she pointed out that guy because he resembled the person that she said raped her. So while she looked at the pictures, it was fresh in her memory. When they did the physical lineup with the suspects in line with the number, she pointed out the same person that was on the picture. Why did she do that? Because it was fresh in her mind, and that was the person that she seen on the photographs. So she picked him out. That's why he went to jail. Even though it wasn't him, he went to jail for a long time, for 11 years, and DNA exonerated him. There are many cases that DNA exonerates people that were misidentified by eyewitness. There was another case where a father went outside to tell his kids, it was time to come inside. They had been outside all day. While he was outside, they had a car that was driving by the neighborhood slowly. The kids seen an arm stick out the passenger side window with a gun, and they heard shots fired, and next thing you know, their father had died. Um, they identified the person that was living in the neighborhood. Well, what happened was the police took pictures of all the criminals who ever committed crimes in the neighborhood, and they showed the kids the videos. Now, they knew that guy lived in the neighborhood, so they identified him as the shooter and the murderer. Um, he went to jail. He was on death row for a very long time. He pleaded for his innocence, and they had an expert witness come up and had to go. The judge actually came down. They looked at the lighting. They looked how far the kids were away from the road. They looked to see if anything was in the view of the kids and the car that was driving on the road. And it was impossible for the kids to see the shooter, because the lighting wasn't there. They were too far away from the road. So he got exonerated because they didn't have a murder weapon anyway at his house or found on him or anything. He got exonerated for eyewitness misidentification. Researchers are trying to find ways to better help the criminal justice system in not doing misidentifications for eyewitnesses. So they came up with the study called ROC, or received operating characteristics, which that takes the data from the lineups that are correct, and it takes the data from the lineups that are not correct, and they come up with the difference. So if the difference is leaning closer to the correct side, then they deem that lineup to be accurate. That's how they're gonna test to see the accuracy of the witness identification. There's another way to inform the jury. The judges inform the juries and the attorneys on the importance of eyewitness identification, if things that they don't know versus the things that they do know, so they can try to come up with an idea on how to correctly identify. Not identify, correctly identify somebody in a lineup, or 100% accurate. Well, nothing's 100% accurate, but 100% accurate in the criminal justice system.